Good morning and welcome back. Can you do a full wood inlay just using the Thunder laser bolt? You sure can, but you're going to have to learn Kerf today on LaserNug. So over the last number of months, you've seen that I use a lot of acrylic. I love acrylic, but I do use wood from time to time. When you see me making different types of signs or designs, I often use kind of a raised inlay approach, where I'll slightly engrave the base plate, so to speak, and then I've got raised letters or raised designs that I slip into those pockets, into those engraved pockets. It works really well because I'm not looking for a really tight fit. I'm just looking for almost a template of where my pieces need to fit on the back plate. But if you're looking to do a full inlay, especially with wood, you're not going to be very successful unless you learn how to use Kerf. I'm just going to demonstrate it today using some scrap craft plywood. This is a maple craft, maple veneer, MDF in the core, and I've also got a nice thin layer of cherry wood. As you know, that's my favorite wood. And as you can see here, she's perfectly flush, fully inlaid, and it looks beautiful. The reason it looks beautiful is because I used Kerf. Let me show you. I've just made a simple acrylic logo here. It's my logo, as you know. And I applied no Kerf to these settings. I cut out my white background, cut the letter shapes out of the white background, and then I used an orange and a gray piece of acrylic to cut the letters out and fit them in. But without Kerf, the letters fall out. That's because I didn't apply a Kerf adjustment. In other words, when the laser cuts those letters out, the laser beam cuts away a tiny bit of material. Kind of just like your table saw or your compound miter saw, any other type of saw or chainsaw that you use, the blade cuts away a piece of material. So the Kerf adjustment in Lightburn provides an offset so that the next time you do it and you apply a Kerf adjustment when you're cutting out your individual letters in orange or gray, they fit really snugly. They don't come out. And that allows you, especially when working with wood, to get a nice, clean, tight fit so that the one piece of wood or the one piece of acrylic naturally blends into the other one. So when I was applying my inlay here, I had to apply a Kerf adjustment to the palm tree. I had to apply that so that I got a nice, tight fit. That way when I've sanded it down and finished it, it looks like it's one continuous piece of wood. You can't really see any gaps around any of the palm leaves, the stem, or the bushes down at the bottom. It fits in nice and snug and becomes almost like one unified piece. I'm not going to go through the details of Kerf or how to figure out your Kerf, but I am going to put a description to a video that I found that does a really good job of explaining it to you. I'll put that link down in the video and I'll show you how I use it today. One note, whenever you're using any one of the dozens of different videos on YouTube that explain to you how to find your Kerf, you're going to find that even though you follow that prescribed method, you're still going to probably need to make adjustments and test fit a few pieces to adjust it to get it fine-tuned to exactly what the Kerf is for the lens on your Thunderbolt or on any laser. You're going to need your calipers. On today's video, I'm just going to use a scrap piece of craft plywood. I've got a nice thin sheet of cherry, which I shaved off earlier to use for the experiment. And I have my exact Kerf adjustment for the 1.5-inch lens. And most importantly today, if I was going to do these pieces, for example, this design, I would perfect settings to do it so that I could engrave it deeper quicker and get it done faster. But for today's experiment, I'm just going to use my regular settings. It's going to take me several other passes to get down into the craft board in order to put my inlay. But the point or the experiment is there for you so you understand how the Kerf works and how you can produce wonderful ornaments, signs, different types of designs using inlaid wood, real wood, not just plywood. Let's get her done. So here in Lightburn, there's the design that I used for my test file. We're just going to stick with that. You'll see that I have 3 different layers. In other words, I've got 2 separate engrave layers, as well as my red layer here, which cuts out the outline out of my craft board. If I come over here to the right, there's my standard red layer for cutting it. And again, this is not specific to this maple craft board. I just took some close settings for the purpose of demonstration. Notice there's no Kerf offset here. And because I'm using not the best settings, I need to get down low enough that I can get my cherry inlay in. So I've created two different fill settings. One here in black, and that black setting will get me the right depth and color of engrave for the words just chillin', and that's all I want it to do. But when it comes to doing the palm tree, I had to create a separate fill layer, add a different set of power and speed settings, and a number of passes, because I want to make sure that it gets down at least closer to that 1/16th thickness that I have of my cherry inlay that I cut off on my table saw this morning. I just want to break in for a second. I didn't earlier understand what the point of this output button was here. But when you start to get into different designs such as this, where you've got different pieces and you want to be able to do different parts separately, that's where I've learned this output button is a really handy feature. For example, if I take a look at this overall design, and let's say, for example, as you know, I want to engrave first and I don't want to cut until I'm totally done. So when I grab just this inside piece, look where my origin sits. That's because I didn't highlight my cut layer and I didn't include it in my overall design. So right now, I'm going to send a file over to the bolt that has an origin that sits here. But when I am done all my engraves and the multiple passes and I'm ready, I'm going to come back and I'm going to have to highlight the red one. And if I highlight the red one, my origin changes, which means I'm going to have to try to eyeball it in the bolt to reset it. So the beauty of this is I can highlight my entire design, group it, my origin sits here on the red, and watch what happens to the origin when I turn off the red layer. So I'll turn off the output. See how my origin stays exactly on the entire design. So once I've placed it into the bolt, set my origin on the honeycomb, I don't have to worry about this design moving. It's only going to output the engraved pieces that I've asked it to. And when I'm done with the engraved pieces, I'll just simply turn the output on, turn the output off on the engraved pieces, send it back to the bolt. The origin stays exactly where it's supposed to stay for the entire design, and it knows to cut exactly where it's supposed to cut. I hope that's been helpful. That being said, let's put the output back on there, turn off the output on my red cut layer here, and let's send it to the bolt. At the bolt, I'm just going to use this scrap piece of craft board. I'm going to get it into the bolt, autofocus, set my origin, and I'm going to begin my engraves. So she's done that initial pass, but before I finish the piece by doing the cut and taking it out, I want to make sure that my palm tree has a reasonable depth. I know that my little piece of cherry is 1/16th, so I just want to make sure I'm getting close to it, so I need my calipers. I'm going to end up using my depth measurement at the end. We'll calibrate it, and let's see how deep that is. Oh, and it's pretty close, but I think, yeah, we can go a little bit further. Just saves me from having to sand more, but I'm almost there. So we'll make one more pass on the palm tree. So back here in Lightburn, I don't need to re-engrave the words just chillin', because I like the depth of that. I just want to rerun the palm tree. So I'm going to grab my design, and I'm going to turn off the output on my black layer, or my words just chillin'. All I want to do is rerun the green layer, which is the palm tree. I'm going to resend that back. My origin stays the same, nothing changes. All I have to do is run the file. File's here. I don't need to autofocus again. My origin always stays the same. I don't need to frame it, I just need to rerun it and let it engrave the palm tree one more time. I think I probably should have adjusted my air and put a little more air onto that engrave, because you can see it's flamed up here and there. MDF tends to do that when it gets really hot. Okay, that depth is good. So now let's finish the job by running our cut pass. Okay, back in Lightburn. All I need to run now is my cut. So I'm going to turn off the last layer, which was that fill layer. I'm going to turn on the output for my cut. I'm going to highlight my cut. Once again, the origin was set, including the full job, so I don't have to reset anything. I just need to send it to the bolt and let it cut it out. Usually, you know, I like to mask my wood, but since I have to sand this anyways, I didn't bother. But we'll clean it up, a little bit of a toothbrush, little air, and she'll be ready for the inlay. So now for our finale, we need to cut our cherry wood. This is where our friend Kerf comes in. I don't need anything out of here except the palm tree. Okay, I'm going to make this a red cut layer, so it has my cut settings. And I'm going to open up my layer, and this is where down here in the middle you need to add your kerf. I've determined that 0.005 is the correct kerf adjustment outward to offset the thickness of the laser beam. And you'll see here it says outward, because I want it to cut and I guess offset what would have otherwise been a smaller tree. It just makes it a little bit bigger because it's offsetting or cutting a little bit wider than it would normally cut. I'm good. I've got high air. My settings are there. My kerf is there. All is good. I've got one pass. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to turn on the output for that cut layer. And now I'm going to send it to the bolt. We're going to autofocus. And I'm going to cut it so the grain runs in the same direction as my maple craft board. That's it. Let's run the job. Okay, the moment of truth. Will it fit? If my kerf adjustment was accurate, my palm tree should fit in nice and tight. Oh, and it does. Isn't that nice? Look at that. That is a nice tight fit. I'm going to grab some of this Starbond thick because it's great for this type of application. It's thick enough that if you don't have a perfectly flat surface being glued to another flat surface, it'll kind of fill it in and glue it. We'll grab some of this, apply it, and then we'll get this thing sanded down. So that's a wrap. And there she is again. Take two, so to speak. There's my first one and the second one. Sanded nice and flush and level, and it's a beautiful inlay. Could have done a couple of things with this, of course. If I wanted to, I could have masked it and then painted my letters with whatever color. I could have painted the background on the craft board. And if I really wanted to, I could have taken some of the sawdust with a little bit of glue and I could have mushed it into the tiny edges just to help that transition. But she came out pretty flush. So for me, I learned a few things doing this project or testing this out to answer your questions. I learned the importance of kerf, and I think over time, when I'm ready, I'm going to take my 2.5 inch on my 4-inch lens and I'm going to determine the kerf on those two lenses. Because I think when you start to go a little deep into wood or different material with the engrave, using a larger lens will probably get it done quicker. I also learned what the output toggle switches on each of those layers and how helpful it is when you're doing this type of project where you have multiple different engrave or cut layers and you don't want to move your origin or try to guesstimate the job. It holds it where it's supposed to go. I also learned that I think this is probably the first time I should have put some air on that engrave, because that MDF, as you notice, started to flame up when it got really hot. So I probably should have put the air output on and then used my manual adjustment to give it, about 50% air, at least 50% on that manual adjustment, just to keep it as cool as I could. So I hope you found today's videos helpful or informative and it's helped you out in your learning process. I wanted to thank you folks for asking me about wood inlays. I love working with wood, especially natural woods instead of craft boards or plywoods. I love cherry and maple, and this probably would have looked a lot nicer inlaid on a real piece of maple. But hey, have a great week. Please be kind to each other, and I'll see you again right here. I'm Gord Potter, and you've been watching Laser Nug. Cheers.